What if the only way to survive was to run into the dark with nothing but hope to guide you? Blood trickled down Beatrice Foster's chin as she stumbled through the cold Arizona night, the vast desert stretching around her like an endless shadow. Her husband's threat echoed in her ears. He had promised to end her life if she ever tried to leave again. This time she had no choice. If she stayed, she would die. She clutched her side where his boot had struck her ribs, each breath sharp and painful, each step a reminder that one more beating might have been her last. The year was 1885, and the lights of Camp Verde flickered far behind her like faint stars. Beatrice kept walking, even as the night wind stabbed through her torn dress. She had left her wedding ring on the bloodied floor of her home, a home she had once believed would bring happiness. Now she had nothing except her torn clothes and a fragile hope that somewhere ahead waited safety. Her legs shook with every step. The desert air grew colder, chilling her to the bone. She didn't know how long she had been walking before her body finally gave out. She collapsed beside a wooden fence post that marked the edge of someone's land. Through the haze clouding her vision, she saw a small ranch house in the distance. A lantern burned in one of its windows. It glowed warm and steady, like a beacon calling her forward. With the final strength she had left, she crawled toward the light. Her fingers dug into the rough dirt. She whispered a silent prayer that whoever lived there had more kindness in their heart than the man she fled. Her vision blurred. Her body trembled. She could no longer feel her legs. Just before she lost consciousness, she heard footsteps approaching and felt a shadow fall over her. "Madam, good Lord, what happened to you?" A deep voice asked, full of concern instead of anger. She lifted her head weakly. Through the blur she saw a tall figure, his hat brim hiding most of his face. But she saw his eyes, kind eyes, safe eyes. Then darkness swallowed her. Kenton Ollie had been working on his ranch ledger when he'd heard a faint cry outside. Living alone in the Arizona Territory for over 20 years had taught him to check every strange sound. The desert could be cruel, and anyone out in the night might need help. He never expected to find a battered woman collapsed near his fence line. He knelt beside her and saw the bruises on her face, the cuts on her arms, the fear still fresh in her expression even as she lay unconscious. Without hesitation, he lifted her in his arms. She felt light, far too light. He carried her into his home and laid her gently on his bed. Then he gathered water, bandages, and medicinal whiskey. He had treated plenty of injuries on himself over the years, but never wounds like these. His hands, strong enough to break a wild horse, moved with surprising care as he cleaned the blood and dirt from her face. Suddenly she woke with a gasp, fear shooting through her eyes. She pushed herself back against the headboard, raising her arms in front of her. "Please, don't hurt me," she whispered. Kenton immediately stepped back, raising both his hands. "I won't touch you again, madam. You're safe here." Quote. She breathed hard, her eyes scanning the room, checking every corner like someone who had learned danger too well. "Where am I?" she asked. "My ranch," Kenton replied softly. "About 5 miles outside Camp Verde. I found you near my fence." Her breath caught on a wave of pain as she shifted. "My name is Beatrice Foster." "You need a doctor," Kenton said. "No," the word tore out of her. "No doctors." "He'll find me." Kenton understood instantly. He had seen this kind of fear before, women who carried their husbands, anger on their skin. "Your husband did this?" he asked carefully. She nodded, tears gathering in her eyes. "If he finds me, he'll kill me," he promised. Kenton walked to the window and looked out into the quiet night. He felt anger rise inside him, not the wild anger of a reckless man, but the deep, steady anger of someone who believed in right and wrong. When he turned back, he kept his voice calm. "He won't find you here, not tonight." She stared at him with a mix of disbelief and exhaustion. "Why would you help me? You don't even know me." Quote. He shook his head. "My ma raised me better than to leave a soul in need." He brought her clean clothes, a shirt and trousers that hung off her small frame. "I'll step outside while you change. There's water in the basin if you'd like to wash more." When he returned, she sat on the edge of the bed wearing his clothes, looking cleaner but still broken. The bruises on her face were dark and painful to see. "I'll sleep by the fire tonight," Kenton said. "You take the bed." Beatrice stared at him. "You're really letting me stay?" Quote. "At least until morning," he answered. "Then we figure out what comes next." For the first time since he'd found her, he saw a flicker of hope in her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. "Kent," he said gently. "Just Kent." That night he sat by the fire, rifle across his lap, watching the door each time the wind howled. He didn't know what morning would bring, but one thing he knew for certain. No one was taking this woman back to the hell she had escaped. When dawn broke, Beatrice stepped out of the bedroom wearing his clothes, her injuries even more visible in the morning light. He greeted her with a simple "morning" and brewed strong coffee. She tried to refuse food at first, saying she shouldn't stay long. "He'll be looking for me," she said quietly. Kenton nodded toward the table. "Sit, eat first, then we talk." She hesitated, then slowly took a seat. As she ate, he saw how hungry she truly was. He didn't ask questions until she finished. Then he finally spoke. "Your husband, he's in Camp Verde?" She nodded. "Charles Foster owns the general store. Everyone thinks he's a good man." But Kenton had seen enough scoundrels hide behind smiles. "How long has he been hurting you?" he asked. She looked down at her hands. "Almost since the beginning. 3 years now." Kenton's jaw tightened. "What changed?" he asked softly. "I lost a baby last year," she whispered. He said it was my fault. Kenton closed his eyes for a moment. The kind of man who could say such a thing was capable of anything. "Beatrice," he said firmly, "you can stay here until we figure out something better. You don't have to go back." She lifted her eyes, fear and hope tangled inside them. "You don't even know me." "You're someone who deserves safety," he said. "That's enough." And for the first time in years, she felt a small piece of her heart settle. The quiet morning inside Kenton's cabin felt safer than any place Beatrice had known in years. But safety had a way of slipping through her fingers. She wrapped her hands around the warm coffee mug, trying to steady the tremble in her fingers. Kenton sat across from her, his calm presence filling the small room with a sense of steadiness she didn't understand yet. "You can stay here?" he repeated gently. "At least until we find a better plan." Her breath caught. "He'll come looking. Charles won't stop until he finds me." Kenton leaned back slightly, thinking. "Then we'll give him nothing to find." Those simple words made something warm and unfamiliar rise in her chest. No one had ever talked about protecting her. Not like this. Kenton stood and looked out the window, scanning the desert as if expecting trouble. "We need a story. If anyone asks, you're my cousin from Missouri, Rose Alley, recently widowed." Beatrice blinked, surprised. "You'd lie for me?" He turned back toward her. "I'd protect someone in danger. That's not the same." She swallowed hard, unsure how to answer. Before she could speak, a sharp knock rattled the door. Kenton stiffened. "Back room. Now." Fear jolted through her. She hurried down the hall, ducking into the spare bedroom and closing the door, her heart pounding. Kenton opened the front door halfway. Sheriff Wilson stood on the porch, rain from distant clouds still on his coat. Another man from town stood beside him. "Morning, Ellie," the sheriff said, stepping inside without waiting for permission. "We're looking for Charles Foster's wife. Seems she ran off." Kenton kept his voice steady. "Haven't seen her." "Strange coincidence," the sheriff said, scanning the room. "A woman goes missing, and we hear you got a lady staying with you." Kenton didn't blink. "My cousin's visiting. Lost her husband." "Cousin?" The sheriff raised an eyebrow. "Didn't know you had family out this way?" "Most folks don't ask," Kenton replied coolly. Before the sheriff could respond, footsteps sounded behind them. Beatrice appeared in the hallway, wearing one of Kenton's plainer dresses and a shawl wrapped tightly around her shoulders. Her hair was pulled back different from anything Charles would expect. She kept her chin high, even though her hands trembled. "Cousin Kent," she said, using a slightly softer voice than her own. "I heard voices." The sheriff studied her, his eyes lingering on the fading bruises. "You're the cousin, Mrs. Ali?" "Yes," she answered smoothly. "Rose Ali. I've only been here a week." The sheriff stepped closer. "Mind telling me where you're from?" "Missouri," she said without hesitating. "I lost my husband. I came here to help Kent while I decide what to do next." Her tone was steady, her posture calm, her lie flawless. Kenton watched her with something close to awe. For a woman who had lived in fear for 3 years, she carried herself like someone ready to reclaim her life. The sheriff finally nodded. "If you hear anything about Mrs. Foster, you let me know." "Of course," Beatrice said politely. The sheriff and the other man stepped out into the yard. Then another voice sounded. "I'll take a look myself." "Charles Foster." Beatrice froze where she stood. Kenton tensed, blocking the doorway as Charles strode forward. He wore fine clothes and a smooth expression, but his eyes were cold. "I just want to make sure my wife ain't hiding here," Charles said. "She ain't well, might wander anywhere." Kenton's jaw tightened. "You're not coming inside." Charles smirked. "What are you hiding?" Before anything escalated, the sheriff stepped between them. "Foster, we already looked. Let's move on." Charles hesitated. His eyes flicked from Kenton to Beatrice. For a terrible moment, it seemed like he recognized her. Her heart hammered in her chest. But then he turned away, muttering under his breath, and followed the sheriff toward the horses. Only when they were completely gone did Beatrice release the breath she'd been holding. "They didn't believe me," she whispered. "They'll come back." Kenton stepped close but kept his hands respectfully at his sides. "He didn't recognize you, but he's suspicious. We don't have much time." Fear tightened her voice. "We have to leave." "I know," Kenton said, "and I'm going with you." Her eyes snapped up. "You can't leave your home, your ranch." "I can rebuild land," he said quietly. "But I can't rebuild a life knowing I left you to face him alone." She opened her mouth, but no words came. No one had ever chosen her, not like this. They spent the rest of the day preparing in silence, broken only by the soft sound of footsteps, the rustle of supplies being packed, the quiet breath of 2 people caught between danger and something new and fragile growing between them. By nightfall, a spring storm rolled in. The wind shook the walls. Thunder cracked through the sky. They sat by the fire, shadows flickering across their faces. Beatrice finally spoke. "Why are you doing all this for me, Ken? You don't know me?" He looked into the fire. "I've seen enough to know you deserve better." When he finally lifted his gaze to hers, something warm passed between them, something powerful, something new. The thunder crashed again. Beatrice flinched, and Kenton moved without thinking, checking the window. Suddenly he stiffened. "Riders!" Her breath stopped. He didn't have to say who it might be. "Go to your room," he said quietly. "Hide." Her voice trembled. "Kenton." "Now." She obeyed, disappearing down the hall just as the pounding on the door began. "Ken Ali!" the sheriff shouted. "Open up!" Kenton opened the door, his face unreadable. Rain poured behind the sheriff. Charles Foster stood there again, his eyes colder than ever. "We're looking again," Charles said. "And this time, we're checking every room." Behind the hallway door, Beatrice pressed her, shaking hands against her mouth, praying they wouldn't hear her breath. Kenton stood tall in the doorway, blocking the sheriff and Charles from stepping inside. Lightning flashed behind them, turning their shadows long and sharp across the porch. "You already searched," Kenton said calmly. "There's no one here but me and my cousin." Charles tightened his jaw. "Then you won't mind if we look again." Beatrice's heart pounded from behind the bedroom door. She pressed her body against the wall, trying to steady her shaking breath. She heard boots thud across the wooden floor, voices low, tension thick. Kenton didn't move at first. He stood like a stone, refusing to give an inch. But he knew if he pushed too hard, the sheriff would force his way in. He had to choose his battle. "Fine," Kenton finally said. "But you stay in the main room. My cousin is sick and resting." Charles tried to push past him, but Kenton stepped close, lowering his voice. "You put 1 foot down that hall, and we'll have a different kind of conversation." Something in Kenton's eyes made Charles stop. The sheriff cleared his throat. "You heard the man. We'll take a quick look and be done." They searched the kitchen, the small pantry, the sitting area. Charles scanned every corner, suspicion burning in his eyes. Beatrice held her breath as the footsteps grew closer to the hall. Then Kenton spoke loudly, forcing their attention away from the door. "You treating your wife right, Foster?" His voice was steady, but it carried a warning. "Word is, she ran off. Women don't do that unless they're scared or hurting." Charles spun around. "My wife is not scared of me," he snapped. "She's confused, emotional. She doesn't think straight." The way he said it made Beatrice's skin crawl. The sheriff laid a hand on Charles's shoulder. "We're done here." Charles hesitated one last time, eyes narrowing at the hall. Then he turned and walked out into the storm. Only when their horses' hoofbeats faded into the distance did Kenton release the breath he'd been holding. The minute the door closed, Beatrice came out, shaking so badly she could barely stand. Kenton caught her before she fell. "He knows," she whispered. He didn't say it, but he felt it. I saw it in his eyes. Kenton held her steady. "Then, we leave at dawn." Quote, "But your ranch?" "Land can be rebuilt," he said softly. "Lives can't." The storm raged outside as they packed food, water, blankets, spare clothes, whatever they could carry. They did not sleep that night. Beatrice watched Kenton move through the small house, preparing everything with quiet determination. She had never known a man who protected anyone but himself. But here he was, risking everything for her. Just before sunrise, they saddled 2 horses and rode north into the mountains. The sky turned pale pink behind them as they left the ranch behind. Beatrice looked back once, her chest tightening. That small cabin had been the first place she felt safe in years. "We'll find that again," Kenton said as if reading her thoughts. "And better." They rode through narrow trails, staying off the main roads. Kenton knew the land well, guiding them through thick pines and across cold mountain streams. By midday, they reached a small, abandoned cabin tucked into the woods. He decided they would rest there. Inside, Beatrice finally let her guard slip. She sank onto the bed, exhaustion washing over her. Kenton knelt beside her. "You did everything right," he whispered. Her voice shook. "He'll come after us." Kenton gently touched her cheek. "Then he'll have to go through me." Beatrice lifted her eyes to his. Everything she felt, fear, hope, longing, trembled inside her. "Kenton," she whispered. He didn't wait. He kissed her, slow and careful at first, then deeper as she pulled him closer. It wasn't a desperate kiss like before. This one felt different. Steady. True. A promise. When they finally pulled apart, she rested her forehead against his. "I love you," she said softly. "I didn't think I ever would again, but I love you." His breath caught, then he nodded, cupping her face gently. "And I love you. I'll prove it every step of the way." They left the next morning before dawn, traveling for days through the mountains, but danger followed. One afternoon, Kenton spotted smoke rising in the distance, the kind that comes from riders tracking someone. "Foster's hiring men," Kenton said. "He's close." Quote, They pushed harder, riding from dawn until nightfall, sleeping in hidden valleys and thick forest. Beatrice never complained, even when her body trembled with exhaustion. She trusted Kenton completely. On the 4th day, they reached a small town near the California border. They planned to take a train west. Kenton bought tickets under a false name, but Beatrice spotted 2 unfamiliar men watching the station. "Kenton, I think they're looking for us." He didn't argue. New plan. That night, they sneaked into a freight car as a train prepared to leave. Hidden in the shadows, they held each other as the train rumbled west, carrying them away from danger. For the first time in weeks, Beatrice slept without waking in fear. But the next afternoon, the train stopped for inspection. Workers opened their car. Kenton quickly stood to distract them. "It's just me," he said. Needed to travel cheap. The men seemed ready to accept the bribe he offered until a railroad officer stepped in. "A stowaway," he shouted. "Get the sheriff!" Quote, Beatrice hid deep in the shadows as they dragged Kenton off the train in handcuffs. She watched helplessly as the town sheriff locked him in a small jail. Her heart broke. She had finally found safety, love, and hope, and now it was all being ripped away. Hours later, she climbed silently to the small barred window of Kenton's cell. "I'm getting you out," she whispered. "Beatrice, no, you need to run." "I'm not leaving you," she said fiercely. "Not ever." With help from a kind woman in town, she stole the cell key. That night, she unlocked the door, grabbed Kenton's hand, and pulled him into the darkness. They escaped in a wagon under the cover of night, traveling west as fast as the horses could run. 4 days later, they reached California, really reached it, far beyond Charles's reach. An old rancher offered them shelter. There, finally, they breathed freely. Weeks passed. Then, a letter came. Charles Foster was dead. Beatrice stared at the words, her hands trembling. "I'm free," she whispered, "truly free." Kenton took her into his arms. "You've been free since the night you ran. Now the world knows it too." They married quietly beneath a golden California sunset, witnessed by the rancher who helped them. Beatrice wore a simple ivory dress of her own making. Kenton squeezed her hands as he said his vows, his voice thick with emotion. Their new life unfolded gently, beautifully. They bought a small ranch and opened a bookshop in town. Years later, children filled their home with laughter. Their love deepened with every passing season. And sometimes, when the sun set just right across the hills, Beatrice would look at Kenton and smile softly. "Some people run to escape," she'd say, "but we ran toward something worth finding." Kenton would kiss her forehead and whisper, "We ran toward each other." And that truth carried them through every year that followed.